My name is Kyle Kreider, and I am an energy and environmental justice consultant chairing the Rural Power Coalition's Data Center Working Committee. The Rural Data Center Forum is an ongoing expert lecture series open to the public, um, oops, sorry, and organized by the Rural Power Coalition, that's RPC. RPC is comprised of 18 rural place-based organizations focused on the future of rural electric cooperatives, RECs, rural communities, and clean energy transition. We work to advance rural energy systems that are democratically controlled, equitable, and affordable, while supporting healthy environments, well-paying jobs, and the building of community wealth. As a coalition, we're increasingly focused on emergent issues, including, of course, data centers, but also community benefits plans, electric co-op board elections, and federal policy. To find out about all upcoming events, trainings, etc., please sign up for our newsletter using a link we will drop in the chat. And once more, I will post our wonderful guest speaker, her bio in the chat. But basically, we're going to let Ann tell us what she wants you to know about her. Ann, take it away. And by the way, thank you, Chris, for connecting us, for putting us in touch with Ann. And we are looking for future speakers for those of you that have additional ideas. Take it away, Ann.
Hi, thanks for joining us and appreciate everyone being here. I'm going to start sharing if that's okay. And just want to make sure folks can see my screen. All right, everybody see it okay?
We sure do.
Great. So I realize not everybody's here from Virginia. It Virginia is an interesting case study. It's definitely worth learning about. I think you can learn all of the issues through what we have experienced and what we are experiencing. And this is a little overwhelming because most states do not have this level of development. But as I said, that generally the issues are transferable. I'm going to throw a whole lot of data at you and hopefully enough pictures to balance that out. I'm happy to take questions, and I won't go over everything in the slideshow, but I'll give you a good sense of what we feel are the major impacts right now. So just to give you a sense, so I reside in the Northern Virginia area. This is certainly the epicenter of data center development. These are a couple of pictures of what the data centers have looked like, and if you look out into the horizon, you see the Blue Ridge Mountains. So when we say that data centers are beginning to, move into the Virginia countryside, that this is sort of what we mean. So you can see the diesel generators. We'll talk about that a little bit on the bottom right. And as I said, this is Loudoun County, and great pictures taken by our friends at the Piedmont Environmental Council. This is now what data centers are looking like more and more. We used to say if they go up, they'll take less land. Generally, they're going both up and out. So this is what's called a fourth story. This is under construction right now, and that's pretty much what lots of regions in Northern Virginia look like, and increasingly in the rural area as well. They are now being sited well over 100 feet tall, even in rural areas. This is a wide spectrum of stakeholders listed on the right. You get a sense in Virginia, about half of the industry is Amazon. That's probably somewhat unique. We also have one of the headquarters of Amazon in Arlington, Virginia. But because this is mostly actually a construction industry, short-term construction, the construction trades, labor, all sorts of subcontractors are part of the coalition with utilities and these private AI, increasingly these private AI companies. So that we have to work with a very big lobbying um, lobbying workforce sort of on the other side of this, I would say, from kind of the work we try to do in trying to get sustainable data center development. Um, so Virginia is became the epicenter really because we had the fiber originally and lacks very low energy rates and subsidies, which have been very, very effective. The subsidies have been so effective that last year we underwrote this industry by about $2 billion statewide, and that those numbers could literally double every year as more and more data centers go online. That is literally being debated at the state general assembly right now, whether that's a good use of money. And there is, as I said, that is really what's bogging down the negotiations in Richmond. On the right, this is in Fairfax County. This is a new Amazon development right next to townhomes and ball fields. We see that increasingly, the not adequate buffers generally, and that is certainly something that communities need to be working on to ensure that they have adequate distance between the facilities and them. In some of the rural areas, this is less important, but increasingly these projects are near people and other businesses. Just to give you a sense of how many jurisdictions have them, and this is happening in less so in other states, but more jurisdictions in each state as they try to find new places and new resources to take advantage of. But you can see we have about 40 jurisdictions where they are either interested, looking at new projects, or have projects in process already or existing projects. So it's a pretty big, it's pretty much statewide now, and that includes rural areas and non-rural areas. So we have we published a report last summer. It was an effort to really wrap our arms around how big this could be, and just to give you a sense of how much growth since we published the report last summer. There was almost 1,300 buildings in process or existing, and now we're almost up to 1,500. Nobody in the world has that kind of development as one sort of entity. And if you look at the left side, you can see how many acres that we know of that are being lost to this one use, and the square footage, which is somewhat linked to power. The power numbers on this are completely are not, they're the power we know of. Many of these major projects have not announced how much power they will need. So this is what we know. We don't publish anything we don't know. So we're already almost at 70 gigawatts in Virginia that we know of. So just to give you a sense of one of the larger campuses, it's about 8 million square feet here on the bottom left. And just to give an impression that these are often areas of wetlands, lots of stormwater ponds, lots of, and we'll see some pictures later, lots of substations, even on one campus. This is 19 data centers. It's a pretty big one, even for us. And that will be, that says it's 2.1 gigawatts, could end up being more. And so what is challenging for us in Virginia is we haven't had the adequate sort of energy planning and land use protections, ratepayer protections, and we really haven't looked into what are the long-term costs. We know what the short-term benefits are for sure, but we don't know what the long-term costs are. And those are the kinds of questions that communities need to be asking. So infrastructure, this is what you see when you see data centers. You'll notice on the left how big those new substations are. That's a Dominion substation. And on the right, you can see um, that is one of our, that's WNOD Trail. That is a commuter actually facility and recreational facility. And it is pretty much surrounded on both sides with data centers and transmission and substation. So that's the kind of thing we want to avoid going forward, but this is a very real set of impacts that we're seeing. We're also seeing clear cutting. This is part of that same trail where the utility, because they have the right to certain corridors, came in and basically clear cut instead of sort of managing it. So now that area is not shaded. On the right, you see, this is the kind of transmission that comes along. This actually, the transmission first came, and then the new road came, and then you can see all those are data centers in the background there. So pretty overwhelming infrastructure impacts. This is gives you some of the idea of some of the original planning of where transmission, original meaning the last couple of years, um, this is becoming a bigger issue in our state because it's now getting very real, and the federal government is suggesting that they're going to be streamlining some of these approvals. And much of this is going to be going, as you can see, through farmland. So the rural areas are really being are part of this, even if they don't have data centers per se, because these new transmission lines have to serve the increased load going to wherever the data centers are. Um, Fiber, that also is part of the deal. When a data center comes in, it's got to get connected to the underground infrastructure. We already have a lot of fiber because we house, a lot of the internet, the early internet fiber. But this is what that looks like basically along our roadways. Um, so, energy, how much energy? You read about this in the paper. When I started doing this work, we didn't read anything about things in the paper with having to do with data centers. It was very quiet. We only could begin to understand it as we saw these land use applications come in. And since they kept coming in and coming in, um, that's how we began to realize that really something had shifted between the years 2022 and 2023, basically. Um, and because there's been such a shift, you can see sort of and this is not the new one, but it shows the same, basic story of the forecast, which is, as I said, much higher now. And it gives you a sense of the major utilities Dominion in the blue, and then you can see the rural cooperatives in the orange and gray and yellow. And so much of this development is happening under the rural cooperative governance in the state. And I, put in here a little bit of data about Rappahannock Electric Co-op, which is a little bit south of Northern Virginia, where they have 183,000 customers who used last year 1.150 megawatts, basically a little bit over a gigawatt. And they have many multiples of 1 gigawatt projects. So you can see that almost all of their demand will be in data centers, and there's a very different changing dynamic for the residents who also need protection about rates in the rural areas. So lots of waiting for hookup. That has all sorts of implications, and of course, the growth in demand means we have to find all new sources of energy. Virginia's energy demand curve was either flat or a little bit reduced because of our state laws and because of reduced demand. And that has, as you can see, just completely been reversed. Um, uh, this demand curve here on the left was 21 to 24. You see how much it has increased the demand over time, and that got us to about 45 gigawatts of power. And now there's already contracts for 70 gigawatts in the Dominion system. So on the right, this is a natural gas plant that was recently acquired by one of the big data center companies, QTS Blackstone, and that is to service their data centers now directly so that they can be serviced faster than through the grid process. Just to give you a sense of why this is so significant, the power situation, even 60 gigawatts is about 68 new coal plants, and 30 gigawatts is about, we have a North Anna nuclear power plant in Virginia. It's about 18 new major North Annas, or well over 100 small nuclear reactors, which is getting a lot of conversation. So there are definitely implications for where plants would be built, and we weren't really planning to build new plants in Virginia. We had actually been closing plants because they are fossil fuel um, plants. And then the whole issue with small nuclear reactors is that twofold. Obviously, is one, they're not available yet, so we can't utilize that technology even if you believe in it. They will be expensive, and they will be likely located where the data centers are. And that is often where people are too. So very different paradigm if SMRs are part of the future energy spectrum. Here are just a general feeling of how many, what I call those mega projects. This is 37 plus gigawatts of power, just individual plant campuses and where they're planned. There are actually more that could be added to this particular. This gives you a sense. It's all over, and these are, need at least a equivalent of a power plant each, if not two. Power plants, Possum Point Power Plant has already, its capacity has been extended already. And of course, the Mountain Valley Pipeline is being utilized for projects in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. And you'll see campuses being sited near natural gas, more and more over time. And why, gas is challenging. It's a burning fuel, as we know. On the right side, there's a picture of a blue data center. They look really good. This one happens to have 8 turbines, gas turbines. Sounds like you're on the landing strip at Dulles Airport. It's incredibly loud. That one happens to be near single family homes. They also have diesel generators. They are, obviously emitting all sorts of byproducts, pollution, and that seems to be the direction that the industry is headed right now. Meta, we were talking about before, has a lot of natural gas, and Elon Musk's operation in Tennessee and Mississippi is, now legendary for the number of turbines that will be utilized there under, a whole range of circumstances. There was very recently a study, so new I actually haven't completed reading it yet, by the Piedmont Environmental Council about this particular data center on the right and what could happen in terms of the health impacts. I think this is an area where more people will be interested in what are the health impacts of both the primary power and the diesel generators. And we'll talk about that a little bit, which is the backup power. Obviously, this is the Sierra Club. We're big fans of renewable energy and always are encouraging companies to make that part of or completely their fuel source. In our state, Meta has done a really good job overall in terms of how many solar utility scale solar projects they have undertaken for their Richmond campus. Um, I'm pretty sure I think their campus is in Louisiana, they are taking a different approach. So all of these companies are facing challenges to what at one point was some pretty significant climate goals, and they are struggling to be able to meet them because of the increased demands of artificial intelligence and cloud service applications. So their whole calculation, and none of them are meeting their goals. They're Microsoft, Amazon. They just can't do it anymore, unfortunately. Um, I'm sure you have read about the affordability crisis we face. I mean, energy is an enormous part of that in a number of ways, and I don't know how it works exactly where you are, but our regional grid is called PJM. They are uh, showing auction prices that are literally through the roof for future purchases of power because it's supply and demand. Our state corporation commission, which approves rate increases for us, just approved a rate increase, and so where's the demand? This is really about the data centers. And then, of course, the changes in the federal legislation and the tax benefits for clean energy also are going to contribute to the prices that the industry faces, and obviously we all face. So all challenges in terms of protecting all ratepayers. These are some pictures of diesel generators in Northern Virginia. They do look differently. They have had the same function. They serve as backup power for one of the redundancies to ensure that these plants never go down. In our homes, I'm sure we've all experienced power loss. Well, they just can't experience power loss because they're servicing customers all the time. And so they have built in the redundancy, but the redundancy is incredibly polluting. It's polluting in a couple of ways. This is actually a picture of some generators on the left. Those are, I believe, Microsoft generators. But on the right, we are experiencing the development of sort of what I call the diesel generator corridor, pollution corridor, where you have, in our case, now 8,000 industrial generators already permitted in one region. And as you know, this is suburban Washington, lots of people here. We're going to see another one of these sort of corridors south of us, and I'm sure this is happening in Ohio and Texas and Indiana and some of the other places where they're seeing significant growth in diesel. But you have, and by the way, here's a picture on the left of what it looks like when the generators are turned on. That's that same Vantage data center when we had a sleet storm and the turbines went offline and they ginned up the diesel, and people were noticing it and taking pictures, and that's what that is. So that's soot. That's what, at least when I was a little bit younger, we called that soot. And it's really also quite noisy. This gives you a sense, again, I know this is Virginia data, don't look at it too closely, other than it gives you a sense of who the players are. And that often is the same in other states. How many generators we're really talking about, and sort of the growth of the need of generators over time. So this is just data about a shift in the generators policy, which is why we're so concerned about it. Uh, they are limited generally by federal and state law to 500 hours per year, so that they are really just for maintenances and emergencies. But now we are seeing that diesel is being permitted on a non-emergency basis without the hourly limits. They have fuel limits, but those limits are pretty high. It's unclear how this is going to shake out. In Virginia, they're requiring generators that are non-emergency now to have a higher level of pollution control. They're called Tier 4, which is good, But if they begin to run 24/7 as sort of de facto primary power, there really are no studies to understand the cumulative impacts of that kind of use of fuel, and particularly in populated areas. So as many of these are. So we were really pushing for a bill to have more, use more battery storage instead, monitoring, public reporting, air quality analysis, and protection of schools. Some of these they're often near schools, actually, surprisingly. And then again, to limit the generator use, because if it's for an emergency, it really should be for an emergency. Obviously, another impact is if you're burning fossil fuels, you have carbon emission risks. Dominion, our major provider here, utility provider, has definitely called for the doubling, and that was actually in 2023, a doubling of carbon emissions. That has not been updated. I can only imagine what it is now. So big risk there long term, which will be costly, and none of that is factored into these decisions. And then, our neighborhoods. We saw a similar picture on the left, where that was the trail. I just happen to love this picture, and you can see so many data centers and the transmission, and the tiny little trail sort of getting drowned out. And on the right, how close they are to single family homes. So it's affecting all socioeconomic groups of people, all neighborhoods, all areas, and basically nobody's immune from our experience here in Virginia. Here on the right, you see an Amazon data center really, really close to a single family home. Why does that matter? Well, they're not particularly pretty. They can be very noisy, and that really has to do with whatever the noise ordinance is. Generally, they do not have their own noise regulations around them, and they are on 24/7. They don't shut down. Buffers are usually inadequate. We've tried to get more robust buffers in Northern Virginia, been very unsuccessful with that. Impervious surface, again, diesel trucks coming in, delivering the fuel all the time. We talked about air pollution, and just living with industrial infrastructure all around us. So this is a very common sight, and I'm sure it's similar in other places as well. I just give you a sense that, I sort of look at the growth of the industry through some measures. Square feet, megawatts, is the least helpful in some ways, the numbers of buildings. And this just gives you a sense of that, people talk about a bubble. There may be a bubble. They talk about things slowing down, whatever, but we are not seeing that here. And I don't know what you're seeing in your areas, but we've gone from 294 buildings to 459 in this one region south of Northern Virginia, in let's say less than a year, maybe 6 months. And so you've seen a huge increase in square footage that's in play. And so, what I'm seeing is that the growth continues, and whether these will actually get built is another question. And whether the market holds is another question, but they are continuing to get approvals for projects. If you live close to them, if you look, we want buffering, we want fencing, but as you can see on the left, that's a brand new substation in Leesburg, Virginia. It's really hard to fence these substations in. And we have, probably somewhere between 150 and 200 new substations being built for data centers in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Very common, you see here, this is Amazon data center on the right, next to ball fields. The diesel generators are right there next to the ball fields, and those are obviously utilized by kids most of the time. And water is really an emerging area of concern. Obviously, some parts of the United States have more water than others. We're a little mixed in Virginia, but we're seeing as data centers change how they cool their servers in the buildings, they are moving from air cooling to water cooling. And companies have all sorts of different kinds of technologies they do, but because the servers run hotter under these artificial intelligence applications, they have to find a more effective way of cooling the servers down. And so that often requires water, lots of pipes, lots of water storage facilities we're seeing now. And now we see that we're beginning to be in competition with the data centers for drinking water. All throughout Virginia, this is an increasing sort of fight and area of concern. Loudoun County, which is our sort of original county, has done quite a bit of water planning, and they have a reclaim system that can be helpful to reduce impact over time. But their potable water dedicated data centers is rising considerably. You can see, just in 4 years, it went up, to over 1.6 billion gallons. And so as we look at, if you add data centers out of data centers, 6 out of 7 top water users in the county of Loudoun are data centers. So we know that they're having an impact. Recent headline in a rural area of Virginia, Botetourt County, where Google is building a big facility. There was recent litigation where the company was required to share how much water they anticipate using for its 3 data centers. And they have contracted for 2 to 8 million gallons per day. So there is something about Google projects that they're very water intensive, seemingly more so than other, but you put all of these users together, and for many of them, they're under a non-disclosure agreement, so we actually never see the data, but this is one that was court ordered, so pretty significant. Sometimes you get on the right, this was an Amazon project in Spotsylvania County where, you can't even get the number of gallons per day that they have agreed to. So in King George, they're fighting with Amazon about withdrawals from the Rappahannock River. Caroline also is, there's a treatment plant, and that's almost all for data centers. So I think this is something that localities and states really need to be mindful of and plan for if they want data centers. We last year published this report that I mentioned, really sort of outlined, and I encourage you all to use it. It's up on the Virginia chapter of Sierra Club's website, or I can send it to you. But again, it is a big tent look at where this is headed. History really doesn't tell the picture of where we're headed if the market stays intact. We are going to be continuing to work with both our administration, our legislators, and our localities. Localities are very excited about this technology because they get local revenue. So in our state, we both subsidize them at the state level with tax exemptions, but the localities get local property taxes, and so there are real incentives for the industry, and it makes it very hard to make change. But I really encourage you because the report really tackles a lot of these areas. And that's it. So I'm happy to try to answer questions. But that's sort of the overview of the issues that we're worried about and that we're trying to ensure that there's regulation over so that we don't pay in various ways down the road and our children don't pay. So anyway, I hope that's helpful.
Wow, and thank you so much. Very informative and very scary. I certainly have some questions, but I would like to defer to the rest of our audience before I speak up.
I know we have one
Kyle, looks like,
question in the chat
yep.
from Michael. In your experience, what can be done after a site is approved? For example, some groups I work with have pivoted to advocating for a community benefits agreement or engaging in accountability campaigns for local elected leaders. But what other options are there? Michael, if you do want to add any more context, feel free to.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, once they're approved, there isn't so much you can do. And often a lot of these projects are approved under by right conditions, meaning there's really never a public hearing about the specifics that they're in an industrial zone where the use of data center is already allowed, so they just work with staff. And that's been a really big issue. It's much better when they're required to at least get a special permit or a special exception so that you can at least advocate for whatever renewables or, transparency or what have you. We have not seen a lot of community benefit agreements, which means to me that we've sort of lost out on it. I think some of the downstate counties have that has begun a little bit they didn't have to do that actually because there really wasn't opposition in the way that we're seeing now as people are much more aware of the impacts of these projects and don't really want them. So I think that community benefit agreement piece will probably get bigger. But yeah, I think it's a matter of, are your elected officials willing to approach this with any balance? And we haven't really seen that. They are, even if you want data centers, there's a way, European standards, for instance, are much more stringent than most American. And so these same companies are doing much more environmentally sensitive projects in Europe, and here they get away with not doing it. So I think we do have to hold every level of government accountable for where we are right now, and really the lack of public debate about whether this is, and of course that is connected to AI in general now. It wasn't originally, but when is enough? And if you're, if the decision makers aren't sensitive to the community, the community is going to have to decide if that's a good fit moving forward.
Thank you. And by the way, one thing I forgot to mention earlier is for any of you that have questions, but you are uncomfortable having your question recorded, just let us know because we can edit the Q&A out of the final video if you are in any way hesitant to ask a question. But I believe we have some more.
Yeah, there's a question about community benefits. I mean, the kind of benefits that we often see is that a company like Amazon or Google might invest in the schools separate from their projects. Then they might uh, support some tech education at a local college. So that is a community benefit. They are generally not linked to individual projects here. Now, you could say that some companies are, or some campuses are required now to pay for the water infrastructure. That certainly is a community benefit, and that is different than what was happening originally. Generally a good thing. Sometimes they donate a portion of the land for a park or something. As I said, it's not too, they haven't needed it as much here, but I think in other states, we're seeing that more because we're just farther along. So people are getting smart and the companies are having to give up more. But those are a few examples. Curious about HB 507. Okay, so 507, which we do think was a pretty good comprehensive bill, which was introduced by a new delegate from a data center from the Loudoun County area. That was substituted for the language that the state is pursuing, which will replace tier 2 generators with tier 4 generators. But it will not, as it stands currently, will not limit it to the 500 hours per year. So the good news is that it looks like we may get a generator bill through. The bad news is it's not the bill that we had hoped for, but it is definitely the work ahead, the points outlined in that, and we will be working with, we have a new governor here, we'll be working with her administration, and of course we'll be back next year because every year we have hundreds and maybe thousands more generators permitted. So about the impact of rural electric cooperatives. So, I am not an expert on rural electric cooperatives. I know it is, at least in our state, we have 3 or 4 rural electric cooperatives that are servicing data centers. For us, I think I mentioned this before, they are exempt from the climate law that we passed a few years ago. So that is a challenge for climate, from a climate perspective. But they are having to, they have such huge load increases in their catchment areas that they have had to segregate their data center work from their residential patrons to protect the residential patrons in case something goes wrong with the data center industry and just doesn't make the whole, all of those, whatever, 183,000 residents are responsible for the industry's ups and downs. So I know that work has been going on. I know generally they have to go to Dominion to get their power. They don't produce power generally. So, I think there are price implications for that. Over time, and again, as I said, I think the governance piece has been changing, but they are part of the major utilities in the data center world, and they are also separate from. So but increasingly, the data centers are being sited in the rural cooperative areas. One of them, for instance, is in Mecklenburg. That's Microsoft has a huge facility there. I think they probably have their own agreement there. Very few people, but pulling a lot of power. But I think this is an issue that you'll hear more about over time, at least in our state, because of the nature of the trajectory of the build out. But they're going to get the same infrastructure. I mean, there's transmission coming through, there's tons and tons of substations coming through. In that way, I think it's no different. Is Virginia going to take action on the cost shift? Yes. So yes, they are, and they have. They have begun to create a new tariff, and data centers are going to be subject for taking on more of the cost. I think it's not enough the way it is structured. As I said, almost all of our new infrastructure is just for data centers, and certainly we would want them to pay for everything that they need just for their own. These are private corporations. But yes, we do see some shifts there. There were some bills introduced into the General Assembly to even expedite that and to do a more robust approach, which generally have not made it through, especially for the big power users. But I do think we might see some relief through that large load tariff, but it doesn't go into effect for some time. And so we have so many projects already permitted that it's going to be very interesting to see how much impact this will have and when. So, but it's a good thing. Yeah. Did I miss any other questions?
Well, while the audience is thinking, I'm posting a link in the chat to a recent video that I just watched this today. It was this video was created by Business Insider 5 months ago. And if I heard the video right, there are more data centers in Virginia than there are in Russia. So I continue to have my mind blown, even as I deal with data centers on a daily basis.
Yeah. I am very familiar with that. I was one of the people that took one of those reporters around in Loudoun County. And by the way, if you're ever flying into Dulles or you International Airport or you are in the area, it's really stunning to go out to Loudoun County and see the build out. It won't be uplifting, but it's definitely worth your while if this is a topic that you want to learn more about. But I took him around. He had been out to Arizona, and then he came to us and he was like, oh, now I get it. Now I get what it's all about. But yes, Business Insider has done an amazing job. They have a whole series. Absolutely recommend it. They sort of did nationally what we have done for Virginia. And so, yeah, it's a great resource. And there are more resources coming out. Like that's also if you're doing in this work now, like we had to build them and we had to like figure it out. And there are more and more reports coming out. What we really need are many more health reports, monitoring, as they go online, what is actually their impact on your communities. And I don't really think we know that. Yeah.
Other questions from our audience? Well, before we wrap, in 2 weeks, so the way the Data Center Working Committee works is every other week we have a marvelous guest speaker to educate us and quite frankly scare us. And then every other week we have a working committee meeting. So obviously with our speakers, these are more public oriented, but if you would like to get down into the details, get down and dirty with the details on energy nerdy data center stuff, you are welcome to join us on our working meetings as well every other Wednesday. And yes, thank you, Aaron, for posting the link to sign up for email updates. Drop us a note in the chat or via email. I will post my email in the chat, but opening it up one more time. Final call for questions, comments.
I'll add one thing is I think it's really important to work with your local planning commission, your local board or city council, your delegates, senators, reps. They get inundated by the industry. There's probably 100 of them for every one of us. They're very well, they have a lot at stake. They're investing incredibly in this, and they want to obviously ensure that their investments are protected from their point of view, but they don't obviously have the rest of us top of mind necessarily, and so they're our electeds and planning commissioners, they get a lot of information, but they really need to hear from other voices. And you don't have to be against data centers for them to do a good job. They can, any kinds of smart regulation and natural resource protection, energy reduction, all of the things that or many of us have been working on just generally over the years, the industry should be subjected to. And so far, to a large extent, they've gotten a pass. But your relationships with those decision makers and making sure they hear, you know, maybe a different story than they're getting from the industry, I think is just really important because the money is formidable. The profits are, and the tax revenue are, you know, they make policymakers and electeds, inclined to do one thing, but communities also have a message to share, whatever that is. I really think that's an important part of this work.
Amen. And while it's not quite confirmed, for those of you that are familiar with the marvelous North Star Data Center Policy Toolkit, we hope to have a guest speaker from the parent organization of that marvelous toolkit in a couple of weeks. Stay tuned